Thanks, Craig. So I'll just start off by saying, as representing the WISPA Association, WISPA New Zealand, so I suppose some of the views that I'll be expressing today are those of WISPA and not necessarily those of the company that I work for. But also say that I'll probably use Lightwire in a lot of examples today, but in using those as examples, there are equally many examples coming from many of the other WISPs around the country. I'm just going to use the Lightwire ones because I suppose I've been involved with Lightwire for a very long time, and I've been really passionate about what we've achieved, and but yeah, other ISPs have done equally well. So start off by introducing some of the other WISPs that are in the association. Talk about why the WISPs are compelling bidders. Talk a bit about the three groups that have known to have put bids in. And then talk a little bit about, I suppose, some of the strengths, real strengths of the WISPs, and why they have something to offer. And then to finish off with a little bit about the outcome for rural New Zealand. So there are currently 15 WISPs in the association, representing most of the regions around the country. A number from the South Island and a number from the north as well. Okay, so just moving on to talking about the evolution of the WISPs and where most of us have grown from. Most WISPs have grown from a need in their communities to get decent broadband. And I suppose if I take myself as an example, I used to work at the University of Waikato. Couldn't get decent broadband at home to do my work. Found that if I stood on the roof of my house, I could see the university, and then a whole university project was born from there, and that eventually moved into a company called Rural Link being set up, and then onto Lightwire. Look at most of the other WISPs, they've come from a very similar background. They've had a problem that's needed to be solved. Either they haven't been able to get decent broadband, or their neighbour hasn't been able to, and then companies have grown up from that. Quite a few of the WISPs have backgrounds in telecommunications, so a lot of them would have grown up in telecom days as techs and things there, and then use that knowledge then to go and the skill set of that to go and set up their own businesses. And these businesses now range in headcounts from 1 to 30 staff. So some of them are very small one-man bands, and some of them are now employing 30 plus staff. And seen incredibly rapid growth in recent years. I think if you have a look at RBI1, all of these WISPs have been growing very rapidly through that time. And I think we have now collectively done a bit of a poll straw around the place, and now have collectively somewhere in the order of 40,000 customers and 800 sites across the country. So, when combined, a fairly dominant player, or a very dominant player. So I suppose comparing us to the national telcos, and I suppose we'll talk a bit more about why some of this is. WISPs are capable of, or typically putting up towers that sort of start from about $5,000 that serve a community down a valley with 5 to 10 households in it. Versus the national telcos, where it can cost up to $500,000 to put up a site. So, with a WISP, you can put up a lot of sites for that and get down into some very sparsely populated areas. The company profiles, most of the WISPs are owner-operators, so the owner of the business is very much involved in it, down to the point of helping stand up new sites and those sorts of things, versus the national telcos, which are large companies or multinationals. Customer service, very personal and local. I think as far as where all of the WISPs currently have their help desks or support centres in New Zealand, in the regions that they live. So they've got a very good knowledge of the regions that they live, versus much more remote contact centres, which are very much more script driven. So I think through the RBI2 process, I think there are three parties that have come out and said that they've submitted bids. That's being the last group that we heard, Chorus and the WISP. So I suppose just to be clear, the WISPs haven't put in a joint bid. Each of the WISPs have put in their own bids, and those bids will generally be, I suppose, based on the environments they come from. So the WISPs know their local regions, and so they've put their best foot forward in terms of what they think is best for the region. And different regions will have fairly different requirements because of the different terrains and those sorts of things. So just working through those then, I suppose the mobile threesome. I think through RBI1 we've seen a number of limitations from using cellular technologies for delivering rural broadband, and I suppose that's coming from a mobile company trying to offer fixed services. Through RBI1 we saw, I suppose, a number of the WISPs of wholesale services, and I suppose seen a number of the issues through that, and that comes from things like the CPE devices wandering between cell sites. So you install it to one cell site, and then you find it's wandered off to a worse one, and then customers are getting a really lousy experience from that. I think other things that we've seen, I suppose, come from the fact that you have one organisation managing one end of a wireless link and another organisation managing the other end of a wireless link, and when something goes wrong, it's can be very hard to actually track down problems, and that leads to very long restoration times around faults and things like that. So I suppose moving on to Chorus, I suppose from RBI1, the things that were really, really good in that for certainly a number of WISPs were getting more fibre out to rural communities. So Lightwire is one of them that has made extensive use of the RBI1 fibre to provide backhaul to our high sites. And that's been really good, particularly through the event of things like the Netflix revolutions and things like that. Just trying to get enough bandwidth far enough out into into rural communities. So I think that's been really, really good. But I suppose using VDSL as a technology to push out into connecting the end users and things. VDSL has a good range of about just over 1 kilometre, I think it is, and then you have, I suppose, many farmers or many rural properties will have driveways that are longer than that. So and I suppose there are quite varying. The state of the copper asset out there varies quite a lot across the country. From places where every time it rains, it all falls to pieces and things like that. And so I think wireless is the way to move forward in the foreseeable future, at least. Then, and I suppose moving on to the WISPs, then I suppose they're modern, they're proven. There are WISPs now have been around now for well over 10 years, and serving very large customer bases. They're local. And able to provide very cost-effective solutions because of the technologies and the innovation that goes on there. Okay, so reasons to choose the WISPs. I suppose they're broken into four. There's the technology leadership, so very innovative. So as I said, most WISPs have been born out of the need to solve a problem, and have grown from there into businesses that actually serve their communities. As part of that, I've put what I call appropriate technologies. So, what you need to serve a valley with 5 users in it or 5 households in it is incredibly different to what you need to serve something like the Hauraki Plains, where you see 4,000 or 5,000 houses from one high site. And so most of the WISPs now have, a number of different tower types, which I'll show you some examples of shortly, that enable you to cover that broad range of requirements. Reliable and resilient. I think, as I said, WISPs have now been around for 10 years and demonstrated some very reliable networks. And I think the other thing that is built into a lot of the WISP architectures is a level of resilience. So most WISPs use redundant rings in there because they've got putting up wireless links that connect all of the sites together. Most sites have redundancy built into them, so that if one site goes down, that's the only site that it's affected. Things up higher up, because each site has multiple paths to get back to the rest of the world. And yeah, so that's been a very strong factor in the architecture of many WISP networks. Another really good thing with them is that the equipment that we use. So there's some really great technology out there for WISPs that are using now. Most of it is relatively low power, so it's very practical for us to build solar sites. I think up till fairly recently, at least, when large telcos built solar sites and things, it was something that made the newspaper. WISPs are out there building solar sites every day, and many WISPs will have hundreds of them in their networks and things. So low power lets us get on the hills where we can actually provide the best coverage to the communities that we're trying to serve. So I think all of these things here actually make for a really cost-effective solution, and a really good solution to get into rural communities. So just to show you some examples of various WISP sites around the country, and I'm going to start at the top end and then move down. So I suppose a site like this, where you can see you've got some fairly large DMR dishes and that, so having a lot of backhaul capability into it, and then you can see around that site lots of other dishes pointing off in different directions, feeding smaller sites. And so, that site might be responsible for serving, carrying the data for, large hundreds of customers, or even thousands of customers. Moving through to a smaller site here, which might sit above a community that has hundreds of households in it. So again, potentially has a DMR link into it, and then linking off to other sites that feeding those sites and then forming parts of rings for redundancy, and then a number of sectors up there that are providing the actual coverage to the end user. And you'll see there predominantly, this here is a solar site. Coming down now into a community that might serve large numbers of tens or low numbers of hundreds of users, so has a link into it, and then a link onto its neighbouring site. Again, solar powered. That particular one there is out on the west coast of the Waikato, out towards Te Akau, which has, there's no cell phone coverage and things in that area currently, unless you're standing on tops of very high hills. And then I suppose coming down, now we want to get in that area of Te Akau is just big, deep valleys, and in a lot of those valleys, you can stand on a high hill, and all you can see is the ridges of the valleys, and you can't actually see into any of them. So needing a solution that is capable of getting down into those deep valleys, and so you can see there's a single link into it, and then an access point at the top that's providing coverage to that. So again, very low power, so a single solar panel, a couple of batteries there, and I suppose because we have lots of those in networks, they have to be configured to be incredibly reliable and things, because we can't afford, if we don't get any sun for a week and we have 80 of them batteries go flat in the same week, then that's not a good thing. So they need to be really, really well engineered and stuff to make sure that they survive through that. And those sorts of sites, they can be put up in a day and have customers connected to them on the day that they're actually manufactured. So why choose the WISPs as moving forward? They all have I think hopefully I've given you a number of examples of the local customer focus. Very much have grown out of the communities that they serve. The people that are involved in them have a very good knowledge of geography. I suppose if I take myself, I've spent a lot of time climbing hills around the Waikato, and so I have a very good feel. And then when I'm not climbing hills for work, I'm riding a push bike around generally in the valleys and things. So, and when I'm doing that, I'm effectively working because I'm sort of looking on that would make a good hill to get to here and those sorts of things. So we really do know our geography very well. We know our communities really well. Many of us grew up in the communities and things that we're actually serving. And we have kids that go to the local schools and all of those sorts of things. So we know our communities really well. Our help desks or our customer support centres are generally in those communities as well. So we know what the weather's doing outside and all of those sorts of things. And we know the various locations around the areas. We're not afraid of working with others. I know that some of the WISPs are starting to work with lines companies and things, looking at stringing fibre across power lines. Other WISPs work with the likes of Chorus and that for purchasing backhaul out in communities and those sorts of things. So we're, I suppose, very keen on finding the best outcomes for our communities, and we'll work with the parties that we need to deliver those. And I think pretty much in all cases, one of the things, the strengths that WISPs are really keen on is providing superior customer service. So, we go to a huge amount of effort to do that. Okay, so other reasons are that we're reliable, built for longevity. As I said, we've got networks that have been out there for greater than 10 years now. We've had a history, and I think we've heard some fantastic stories earlier this morning from the politicians about the Kaikoura earthquake and just how the WISP, and particularly Amiri.net, were able to come to the party and make a huge difference in that particular place. And there are numbers of examples of that happening all across the world with WISPs and disasters, and how quickly they can respond and how resilient a lot of the equipment has. And as I said, most of the WISPs, the guy that owns the business is out there in the field helping to build sites and things like that, and so has a good understanding across the whole business and a really good understanding of what's going on. The last slide, which I'll just go through fairly quickly, is that WISP tend to be very nimble. We've grown up from some small, from scratch in a lot of cases, and so not bound by large legacy systems. If there's a lot of room, the guys tend to be very, very innovative and can come up with systems fairly quickly that provide solutions to the problems that are required. Have access to some really great technologies, building blocks that allow us to build fit for service solutions. So whether somebody wants a 100 meg connection down a deep valley or they want a commodity internet connection, the building blocks that many of the WISPs use are capable of delivering those sorts of solutions, and starting to see a number now being able to offer wholesale services to other providers and to provide layer 2 access. So as far as a customer is concerned, whether they're plugging into a UFB fibre in town or into the end of a WISP solution, apart from the potential speed differences, it's exactly the same. So we can build some quite good WAN structures and those sorts of things. And I suppose a really key thing is that the WISPs work very closely with the communities, and that has a huge advantage in terms of getting sites deployed on hilltops and things like that. So landowners providing both access to property and support and maintenance, and in some cases, or making it as easy for us as possible. And I think we've heard, given that I'm out of time, we've heard a lot about the benefits. So I suppose the benefits that we've been hearing about through the morning are no different with the WISPs and things like that. So.